Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Leslie Reeves. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Leslie Reeves was born on June 26, 1976, and lived in Troy, Illinois. This is 20 miles east of St. Louis, Missouri. Leslie earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in engineering. She worked for several years as a petroleum engineer before opening a business called All You Studio and Party Place. One of her passions was self-defense. She taught hand-to-hand combat techniques and studied how to use firearms for self-defense. At some point, Leslie married, had 2 children, and divorced. Later, she had a romantic relationship with a man named Robert Tarr, who went by the name Bobby. He was a contractor who lived in nearby Collinsville. The relationship did not work out, but Bobby was not willing to let go. Before moving to the timeline of the crime, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Delete Me. Over the past few years, I have covered a lot of stalking cases which involve a perpetrator easily finding personal information online. When people try to get this information removed, they find out it's extremely time-consuming. Fortunately, there is a solution. Delete Me is a subscription service that can eliminate this type of personal information that is for sale online. They have the straightforward mission of removing customers' information from search results and upholding your right to manage and remove your personal information. The privacy experts at Delete Me work continually to remove information from hundreds of data brokers. This gets rid of your personal data like address, occupation, marital status, age, names of relatives, and so on. How does it work? Submit your information to Delete Me and their experts remove it. After that, they check every 3 months to make sure any new data get removed as well. If you want your personal information removed from search results on the web, go to joindeleteme.com/Dr. Grande. Delete Me is offering 20% off their privacy plans to all my viewers with my code Dr. Grande. Again, that's joindeleteme.com/Dr. Grande, promo code Dr. Grande. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On November 24, 2021, 45-year-old Leslie Reeves went on a first date with a 48-year-old man named Chris Smith. The couple had met online. Chris worked for a pool contractor and lived in Farmersville. This is 56 miles north of Troy. Leslie and Chris went to a bar called the Uptown Saloon, which is on Elevator Street in Farmersville. At about 11:30 p.m., they drove to Chris Smith's house at 104 Nobby Street, just 0.4 miles away. On the next day, November 25, 2021, at about midday, a 16-year-old neighbor of Chris Smith was passing by his house and saw him on the floor through the glass in the front door. When she went to the side door, she noticed the glass in it was broken. She called 911. When the police arrived, they found Chris Smith in the kitchen, severely wounded from a single gunshot wound to the head. Leslie Reeves was in the living room. She had been killed by a single gunshot wound to the head. Here is what the police found during the course of their investigation. Both Leslie and Chris had been shot with a pistol chambered in 9mm Luger. 2 spent cases were found in the house, one on the kitchen floor and one on the living room floor. The glass in the side door had been broken. A refrigerator had been pulled away from the wall in the kitchen as if someone had been trying to block the side door, like maybe a person was there who was trying to get in. A burnt pizza was found in the oven. Presumably, Leslie and Chris were cooking this when the attack occurred. Chris Smith's dog, Tiki, was next to him. She remained with him since the shooting. The murder weapon was not found in the house. Therefore, the police knew that a third party was involved. Law enforcement developed a theory of the crime. An assailant broke the glass in the side door to make entry. In order to block the assailant from entering, Leslie tried to move the refrigerator as Chris pushed against the bottom of the door. The assailant fired through the door into the head of Chris Smith. With Chris now incapacitated, the assailant was able to make entry. He chased Leslie into the living room and shot her 1 time in the head. Chris Smith survived the shooting, but he had no memory of anything that occurred after about 5 p.m. on November 24. He did not remember an assailant. He did not remember being shot. He did not even remember Leslie. Not long after the shooting, the police received information that Leslie was having trouble with her former lover, Bobby Tarr. They interviewed him. Here is the story that Bobby supplied. The romance between he and Leslie was in good shape. They were still together romantically, and the relationship was fine. At around 6:30 p.m. on November 24, Bobby left his home in Collinsville to visit a friend. He returned shortly afterward and stayed the entire night in his house along with his 17-year-old daughter, Shelby. The police spoke to Shelby. She indicated that her father left twice that night, at 6:30 p.m. and at 9:15 p.m. When he arrived home after leaving the second time, he was crying, sobbing, and saying that he missed Leslie. Shelby woke up at 2:45 a.m., now on November 25, and found Bobby doing laundry. After being confronted with Shelby's statement, Bobby changed his story. Now he said he visited his friend twice, but he was home no later than 8 p.m. The police discovered video surveillance which captured Bobby's 2013 Volkswagen Jetta at a gas station in Troy at 12:09 a.m. This meant that Bobby had lied to the authorities. Bobby Tarr was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. A week after the crime, when Bobby was in jail, he called a friend of his named Billy and asked him to get rid of aluminum brackets from his front yard, meaning Bobby's front yard. Billy contacted the authorities and informed them about the conversation. They wondered if Bobby may have been speaking in code to get the murder weapon removed from his yard. The police thoroughly searched Bobby's yard, but they didn't find anything. Later, Bobby's brother contacted the police and said he found a Ziploc bag in Bobby's yard with a pistol inside. It was a Springfield Armory Hellcat chambered in 9mm Luger. The weapon belonged to Bobby. This was an unexpected discovery because the police had just searched the same yard without success. The weapon was sent to a laboratory for analysis. It was the murder weapon. Furthermore, the guide rod contained Leslie's DNA, and the Ziploc bag contained a fingerprint belonging to Bobby. On the pistol itself, there were no DNA or fingerprints from Bobby. In September 2022, Bobby Tarr was indicted on 2 counts of solicitation of murder. The police accused him of trying to hire someone while in jail to kill Chris and the lead detective in the case. A few years later, these charges were dismissed. In April 2024, Bobby Tarr went on trial for the murder of Leslie Reeves and the attempted murder of Chris Smith. On April 26th of that year, he was convicted of both charges. On July 1, 2024, 51-year-old Bobby Tarr was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder and 35 years for the attempted murder. The sentences were to be served consecutively. Bobby must serve at least 85% of this sentence. His earliest release date is August 25, 2101, when he will be 128 years old. Now moving to my analysis. Bobby Tarr maintains his innocence, although it does not appear as though he has any supporters. If he did have supporters, they might argue that there is not enough credible evidence to support the conviction. The state, of course, would disagree. They would argue the evidence points clearly to Bobby's guilt. This brings me to the question, was Bobby guilty of murder and attempted murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Bobby Tarr told the police that he and Leslie Reeves were still together romantically, but this was not true. Leslie had broken up with him and was afraid of him. 2 weeks before the shooting, she told a friend that she was on a date, and Bobby showed up unexpectedly. She had not told Bobby that she was going on a date and believed that he must have been tracking her somehow. In a text message to this friend, Leslie wrote, quote, "I could be killed by him someday if I don't cut all contact," unquote. Not long before the shooting, Bobby searched the internet for Chris Smith. He searched to see if police could track his phone if he used a VPN, and he sent a text message to a friend which read, quote, "I don't feel like she would drive that far for a party or go out with a girlfriend. I think it's for a dude," unquote. Initially, Bobby told the police that he only left his house one time on the night of November 24, 2021. When his daughter contradicted this story, he changed it and said he left his house twice. Bobby insisted that he was home by 8 p.m. either way. yet his vehicle was captured at a gas station at 12:09 a.m. on November 25. The murder weapon was a pistol owned by Bobby Tarr. His fingerprint was on the bag containing the pistol, and Leslie's DNA was on the guide rod. Presumably, her DNA transferred onto the gun when Bobby shot her in the head at close range. Bobby claimed that he was no longer the owner of this pistol. Leslie had purchased it from him. This is difficult to believe. Leslie was being trained to use firearms for self-defense. The instructor never saw her bring a Springfield Armory Hellcat pistol to class. Eventually, Bobby Tarr admitted that he had been to Farmersville on the night of the murder. He said that Leslie invited him to the bar in Farmersville, but he said he could not go because his daughter was staying with him. Leslie decided to go without Bobby, but asked him to follow her to Farmersville because her van was unreliable. Bobby insisted that he followed Leslie to the house of Chris Smith and parked outside. He never entered the house. This story is impossible to believe for a few reasons, including if Bobby could not go to the bar because he was watching his daughter, how was he able to drive a 2-hour round trip to follow Leslie? Also, if the plan was to go to a bar, why did Leslie go to the house of Chris Smith? Moving to the exculpatory factors, there were no witnesses to the shooting, no video. Bobby's DNA was not found at the crime scene. His fingerprints weren't there either. The circumstances behind the recovery of the murder weapon were suspicious. The pistol was supposedly found in Bobby's yard. However, his yard had just been searched by the police. Bobby's fingerprint was on the bag containing the pistol, but the gun itself did not contain Bobby's fingerprints or DNA. There was no DNA, blood, or other evidence connected to the shooting in Bobby's Volkswagen Jetta. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Bobby was guilty of murder and attempted murder? In my opinion, yes, he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Bobby Tarr was self-centered, impulsive, irresponsible, petty, vindictive, jealous, immature, insecure, vulnerable, cold, callous, erratic, possessive, obsessive, had a sense of entitlement, and was exceedingly creepy. When Leslie ended the romantic relationship, Bobby transformed into a stalker and expressed characteristics from 3 different types of stalker: rejected, resentful, and predatory. From rejected stalker, Bobby could not accept the end of the romantic relationship. He simultaneously tried to reconcile and get revenge, not realizing those behaviors are incompatible. From resentful stalker, he tried to terrorize and intimidate Leslie in order to regain power and control. And from predatory stalker, Bobby conducted covert surveillance and became violent. He drove to Farmersville, Illinois, with the intent of murdering Leslie Reeves. He was fine with harming other people who interfered with his plan, which is why he shot Chris Smith. One of the most unusual aspects of this case is how Leslie was a proponent of self-defense, specifically for women. She taught self-defense classes designed for women, and she was taking firearm classes. Not only was Leslie aware of how important being prepared was, she knew that Bobby was dangerous. She told a friend that he might kill her. What stands out to me in that text message to the friend was how Leslie also believed that cutting off contact with Bobby would protect her. This was a miscalculation. Cutting off contact was a good idea, but it was only part of a comprehensive self-defense strategy. The type of attack that Bobby perpetrated is extremely difficult to defend against, but if Leslie had a firearm with her, it seems likely she could have effectively used it. She was trained to use a firearm, and based on the state's theory of the attack, Leslie would have had time to use it. If she had time to move the refrigerator, she certainly could have retrieved and fired her weapon. There is no guarantee that Leslie would have prevailed in a gunfight with Bobby. Maybe the outcome would have been the same, but having the weapon would have increased her chances of survival dramatically. It would have also increased the chances of Chris surviving. It's surprising that Leslie did not have a firearm with her, especially considering how she believed Bobby was a stalker, experienced a frightening incident with him 2 weeks earlier, believed he would kill her, and knew that being on a date with another man would potentially activate Bobby's jealousy. There is no way to know if Leslie warned Chris about her stalker, but I believe that she probably did not. In my opinion, she had an obligation to warn him. This way, Chris could have prepared himself if he chose to. At least, this would have given him a chance. Now moving to my final thoughts. This case is particularly disturbing because it shatters the illusion that awareness and preparation can guarantee safety from a determined stalker. Leslie Reeves understood the threat. She took it seriously. She trained for it. She warned others. But in the end, all of these things were not enough. That's the brutality of facing someone who is obsessed. They will break the law. They will not stop. They will not respect boundaries. And they will do anything to achieve their goal, including murder. If anyone should have been able to protect themselves from a stalker, it was Leslie Reeves. Self-defense was a major part of her life. And yet, even with all her knowledge, skill, and vigilance, she became a victim. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder of how easy it is to become complacent, even when the danger is right in front of a person waving a red flag. Those are my thoughts in the case of Leslie Reeves. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.